The postman paused at the gate of Miss Marple's cottage. One letter. Thick paper. Red wax. It read, "To be opened after my death." Miss Marple took it carefully, noting the neat handwriting Edward Salis, a man she hadn't heard from in months. By afternoon, news spread through street. Mary Mead, like smoke. Edward Salis found dead in his study. Gas fire still burning. Windows closed. Inspector Slack called it an accident. Dolly Bantry whispered, it was fate. But Miss Marple stood silent by her parlour window, letter still unopened on the table. Her fingers traced the red seal. Not a speck of dust. Not a single smudge. The wax gleamed like fresh blood. She looked at the clock. 8 minutes past 10. The letter, she murmured, came from a man already buried. The next morning was bright and gentle. Mist over the meadows, sun glinting off teacups. Lady Bantry's drawing-room smelled faintly of roses and furniture, polished the kind of smell that made gossip feel civilized. Ghostly post. That's what I'm calling it, Dolly declared, pouring tea with a hand that shook just enough to show excitement. Imagine, a letter arriving after death. Positively ghastly and yet terribly appropriate, don't you think? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Her knitting needles clicked in rhythm, soft as clockwork. One must be careful with coincidences, Dolly. They rarely stay polite for long. Coincidence? Lady Bantry laughed. My dear, the man's dead, and his letter turns up the same day. That's not coincidence. That's narrative planning. Griselda Clement, perched on the armchair nearest the window, joined in. Poor Salis. Always so stiff, so terribly punctual. If anyone were to schedule his own correspondence from the grave, it would be him. Wasn't he the one who made all those clocks stop chiming in church? Dolly asked. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. He disliked distractions during sermons. Inspector Slack's name fluttered through the conversation next. Dolly imitated him with relish, the gruff tone, the heavy step, the weary sigh of a man perpetually surrounded by amateurs. No mystery here, she growled in imitation. Just bad ventilation. The ladies laughed. Only Miss Marple didn't. Her hands paused on the yarn, a small frown tracing her features. Ventilation, she repeated quietly. Always such an overlooked thing. Dolly waved a biscuit. Oh, Jane, you always think it's something darker. Honestly, can't a man just die naturally anymore? In Street Mary Mead, Griselda teased. Never. Laughter again. Warm, rolling. The conversation drifted toward garden gossip, mildew, frost, a missing head shear. But Miss Marple's thoughts stayed elsewhere. She remembered Edward Salis, clearly a man of habit, always early to church, always exact in his greetings, and never one for surprises. A man like that did not leave red-sealed letters labeled after my death without reason. She sipped her tea slowly. The china clinked. Lady Bantry was talking about chrysanthemums now, but the words passed through Miss Marple like wind through curtains. A letter after death. Wax unmarked. Edges clean. And not a hint of the postman's usual smudge. Something about that envelope had felt too fresh, too deliberate. Her needles resumed their quiet rhythm. Click, click, pause. Dolly noticed the silence. Jane, you're thinking again, she said with mock suspicion. You've got that dreadful look. Miss Marple smiled, eyes still distant. Just wondering, dear, whether the dead really write, or whether someone else simply posts their words for them. The clock on the mantel struck 11:30. The chime echoed soft and steady across the room. Miss Marple looked up. One wonders, she said, almost to herself, who timed it quite so perfectly. The teacups stilled. The room, for a brief moment, forgot to breathe. Then Lady Bantry laughed, but the sound didn't quite reach her eyes. The knock came just after lunch. Firm, rhythmic, no hesitation. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. Only one man in Street Mary Mead knocked like that. Come in, Inspector. Slack entered, hat in hand, expression carved from habit and mild irritation. Afternoon, Miss Marple. Sorry to intrude. I'd rather not, but... He hesitated, glancing toward the side table. The letter. You still have it? Miss Marple rose, calm as ever. It's here, unopened. The envelope lay where she'd placed it that morning, beside a half-finished cup of tea. Red wax, unbroken, edges crisp. Name written in black ink, Miss Jane Marple. Slack drew in a breath. Coroner cleared Salis as accidental. But that letter, well, it's become a bit of a situation. The chief superintendent wants a witness present before we open it. A sensible precaution, Miss Marple murmured. Though I doubt the dead man will mind. Slack managed a small snort. Still, procedure's procedure. He produced a penknife. Ready? Miss Marple nodded. Proceed. The blade slid cleanly through the wax. A soft crack, faint as a heartbeat breaking. Inside was a single folded sheet. Slack unfolded it carefully. No signatures, no dates. Only one sentence, written in Edward Salis's sharp, precise hand. The clock strikes 8, and the truth dies. Slack read it twice, then once more aloud. His jaw tightened. Well, that's clear as fog. Miss Marple tilted her head. Or perfectly clear, if one knows which clock and whose truth. He frowned. You think it's a message? I think it's a schedule, she said softly. Edward Salis never did anything without precision. If he wrote of a clock striking 8, it means a particular one. Not metaphor. Mechanics. Slack stared at the paper, as though it might confess under pressure. No signature. Could be forged. Possibly, she said. But the wax was his. He used red seals for personal matters, always with that small nick on the right edge. Habit from his father's ring. Slack looked up sharply. How do you even know that? Miss Marple smiled. One learns a great deal by watching people post letters, Inspector. They reveal more than they intend. She turned the envelope toward the light. A faint fingerprint glistened in the wax, not smudged, but pressed deep. 8 o'clock, she murmured again. Such a tidy hour for something untidy to happen. Slack folded the note back into its cover. Then we'd best start asking, he said grimly, what exactly died at 8? The old clock on her mantel began to tick louder, or perhaps it only seemed to. The kettle hissed softly. Steam drifted across the small parlour table where Miss Marple had set the letter down once more. Inspector Slack sat opposite her, uneasy in the lace-curtained comfort. He looked out of place among the floral china. Marple poured tea for them both. Milk, Inspector? He nodded. Just a splash. They sipped in silence for a moment. The letter lay between them open, but still commanding the room. The sentence on the page seemed to echo inside the quiet. The clock strikes 8, and the truth dies. Marple lifted the paper again, her eyes soft but sharp. The handwriting, she murmured, is steady, perfectly formed, not a trace of tremor. Means what? Slack asked. That he wasn't frightened when he wrote it. No panic, no haste, a calm mind and time to think. Slack leaned forward. So, not a suicide note. Quite the opposite, she said. It's a statement or perhaps a warning. Her fingers turned the page over gently. Something faint clung to it. A smell. She lifted it closer to her nose, then paused. Paraffin, she said quietly. Slack frowned. Lamp oil? Yes. Distinctly paraffin. You notice how it catches the throat? He sniffed the air. Aye. Maybe. He smoked? Never, Marple replied. She folded the paper carefully. Mr. Salis was rather proud of his health. He considered tobacco vulgar. Even candles, he avoided them. Preferred electric light. Then where'd the smell come from? She smiled slightly. That, Inspector, is the very question. Her gaze drifted toward her own mantel clock, small, brass, dependable. The pendulum swung like thought itself. She spoke softly, almost to herself. Paraffin. On a letter about a clock. 2 things that should never meet. Slack shifted impatiently. You think someone handled it after he wrote it? Perhaps. Or perhaps it rested near something it shouldn't. Her fingers traced the folded edge again. The wax was clean. No dust. the seal unbroken, the message short, deliberate, and left to reach me after his death. That means preparation. He meant it to travel, but he didn't post it himself. Slack frowned. Then who did? Marple's eyes met his. Someone with access. Someone who knew his routines, and someone who didn't mind the smell of paraffin. The inspector set his cup down slowly. "You're saying murder." "I'm saying," Miss Marple replied gently. "The truth may have died at 8, but the killer started much earlier." Outside, the church bell rang the quarter hour. Both of them listened, and the ticking of the mantel clock suddenly felt louder. Sallis House stood at the far edge of the village, tall, square, and silent. Its windows were shut tight, curtains drawn halfway, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Inspector Slack lifted the latch. The heavy door creaked open, releasing a faint scent of polish and still air. Miss Marple followed him in, eyes taking in every corner. The hallway was dim, and everywhere clocks. On the walls, on the tables, in glass cases and on mantels. Dozens of them, each one silent, each one frozen, each at a different time. Slack gave a low whistle. He liked his clocks. "Liked?" Marple murmured. He trusted them. Mr. Sallis believed time told the truth when people did not. A small woman stepped out from the doorway at the end of the hall. Apron clean, hands twisting together. "Mrs. Peel," Slack said. "Yes, sir." Her voice shook a little. "Mr. Sallis's housekeeper, these 30 years. Marple offered a kind smile. "You must have known his habits well." Mrs. Peel nodded, eyes darting toward the nearest mantel. "Every morning he wound them himself, never let me touch a one. Yet now," Marple said softly, "none of them tick." The housekeeper's face went pale. "They stopped, miss. All of them. I heard them wind down one after another. Quiet, like they were. Giving up." "When was that?" Slack asked. "The night before he died." The silence stretched. Even Slack seemed unsettled. Marple moved to the drawing-room door and stepped inside. A tall grandfather clock stood beside the hearth, its pendulum frozen mid-swing. She brushed a finger along the brass. Cold, too clean, as if someone had wiped it after it stopped. The carriage clock on the desk showed a different hour. The one by the window, another still. None agreed. "Odd," she murmured. "If one failed, others might continue. But all? Mrs. Peel's hands twisted harder. "They stopped together, ma'am. Within a minute, I'd swear it. I heard the last one die just as the hall clock struck 8. Marple turned sharply. 8? "Yes, miss. The same hour Mr. Sallis went quiet in his chair." Inspector Slack looked at her. Her knitting bag hung still at her side. 8 o'clock, she repeated softly. "The clock strikes 8 and the truth dies." Her gaze swept across the silent room, filled with lifeless clocks. Each one seemed to listen. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Someone stopped time. On purpose." By late afternoon street, Mary Mead already hummed with rumour, and at the heart of it, as always, sat Lady Dolly Bantry, teapot in hand, voice alive with speculation. "Honestly, Jane," she said, "you can't expect me not to mention it. Everyone's talking about it." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes fixed on the curling steam from her cup. "They would, dear. Death always sharpens conversation." Dolly leaned closer, lowering her voice, though not her enthusiasm. "They say Edward Sallis quarrelled with his nephew last week. In public. Outside the church, of all places." "Oh?" "Yes. Over the will, apparently. The young man thought he was heir to the entire estate, clocks and all. But old Sallis, they say, changed his papers. People change their wills quite often," Marple said calmly. "True," Dolly replied, "but not the night before they die." That silenced the room for a moment. Only the clock on the mantel ticked, steady and smug. Griselda Clement, seated beside the window, looked thoughtful. "I heard the nephew has debts. Cards. Horses, you know the sort. He was counting on that inheritance. And if he didn't get it," Dolly added, eyes bright, "he might have been rather desperate." Marple stirred her tea slowly. Desperation, inheritance, argument in public. Each detail slid neatly into the quiet filing cabinet of her mind. "Of course," Dolly went on. "It's probably all exaggerated. People do so love a scandal. Mrs. Price at the grocer's swore she saw the nephew leave Sal's house late that evening, though she also swore last week that the butcher's cat could talk." Griselda laughed. "And what did the cat say?" "That it preferred mutton." Laughter rippled again, soft, brief, almost guilty. Marple smiled politely but did not join in. Her mind stayed fixed on the phrase, "The clock strikes 8." That single sentence, and all those clocks stopped in perfect disorder. She looked at Dolly. "Tell me, dear, did anyone mention the time of that quarrel?" "Sunday morning after service." "Ah," Marple murmured. "A day devoted to truth, and yet so often the beginning of lies." Dolly blinked. "You're thinking again." Marple's smile returned, gentle as ever. "I'm always thinking, Dolly. It's a dreadful habit. But I find gossip most instructive." "Instructive?" "Yes." She set down her cup. "Gossip, my dear Dolly, is merely data without context." The clock struck 4. Dolly's laughter faltered for a beat, and Miss Marple, eyes half closed, was already arranging the next piece of the puzzle in her mind. Inspector Slack was not in the mood for theories. He paced the hallway of Sal's house, hands behind his back, notebook tucked under one arm. "No sign of a break-in," he said. "No forced windows, no jimmied locks. Door bolts, all inside. Ordinary death, if you ask me." Miss Marple moved quietly through the room, eyes following the dust patterns, the shine on brass. Ordinary, she thought, was rarely so tidy. She stopped by the small side table. 2 cups stood there, one half full of cold tea, the other empty, polished, clean. Too clean. She leaned closer, sniffed lightly, then looked up. "Inspector, would you be so kind as to come here?" Slack sighed and joined her. "What now?" She pointed at the cup. "Smell that." He bent down reluctantly. "Furniture polish." "Indeed," Marple said softly. "Lemon wax by the scent. Not something one usually adds to tea." Slack frowned. "Housekeeper cleaning up?" "Perhaps," she said, though Mrs. Peel swore she hadn't touched the study since the doctor came. And this cup was near his right hand, the one he used. Slack jotted. Something in his notebook. Could have been wiped after he died. People get flustered, tidy things without thinking. Marple's gaze drifted toward the brass clock on the desk. Its glass face gleamed. Not a fingerprint anywhere. Polish again. She ran a finger across the wood surface. Smooth, slick. The faintest residue clung to her fingertip wax, mixed with oil. "Someone," she murmured, "cleaned something they shouldn't have." Slack turned sharply. "Meaning?" She smiled a little. "When people tidy after death, they wipe what matters least. Tables, handles, cups." Her eyes moved back to the clock. "But whoever polished this knew exactly where to erase." The inspector grunted. "You think the clock tells us more than the time?" "It always does," Marple said quietly. "Especially when it has stopped." Slack looked at her. "You mean to tell me the old man was killed, and someone stayed to do housekeeping?" Marple's eyes softened. "Oh, yes, Inspector. Very particular housekeeping." She glanced once more at the shining brass. In its reflection, the teacup gleamed beside the dead man's chair, spotless, silent, and wrong. Slack shut his notebook with a snap. "Right," he muttered. "Now I'm listening." Marple nodded once. "Good. Because whoever cleaned this house cleaned away the truth." Lionel Salas arrived at the house looking perfectly composed. Too composed, Miss Marple thought. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who smiled just enough to seem polite but never long enough to be trusted. Inspector Slack met him in the hall. "Glad you came, Mr. Salas. We'd like a few words." "Of course," Lionel said smoothly. "I've already spoken to your sergeant." "Yes," Slack replied, "but Miss Marple and I have a few small details to clarify." Lionel hesitated when he saw her. "Aunt Jane," he said with a strained smile. "Didn't expect you here. I'm sure you didn't, she replied mildly. You were the last to see your uncle alive, I believe. He nodded. I stopped by after supper about 7:30. We talked for 20 minutes or so. Then I left. What time exactly? Slack asked. Just before 8, Lionel said quickly. The clocks were all chiming as I walked out. Perfectly in sync, as always. Marple's head tilted slightly. All of them? Yes. How fortunate, she said softly. They seem less united now. He shifted. I can't explain that. Slack studied him. Your uncle mention anything unusual? Only that he'd rewritten his will. Said it was business. Nothing to worry about. Slack's eyebrow rose. And were you worried? Lionel gave a short laugh. I've no interest in the old man's money, Inspector. I have my own affairs. Do you? Slack said. We've heard otherwise. Lionel's smile faltered, then returned. Village talk. You know how it is. Yes, Marple said. I do. Her gaze drifted downward. The edges of Lionel's shoes were caked faintly with dry brown dust, odd for a man who'd claimed to come straight from the train that morning. The path to the station was gravel, not soil. Walk far today? She asked gently. He blinked. No, straight here. She nodded, eyes calm. Strange. The only place with that kind of earth is the garden behind your uncle's workshop, quite sticky after the rain. Lionel looked down quickly, then forced a chuckle. Probably from the road. Yes, she said. Probably. Slack closed his notebook. That'll do for now, Mr. Salis. Lionel turned toward the door, too eager to leave. When he was gone, Slack muttered, Smooth type. Marple's eyes lingered on the trail of faint prints he left on the polished floor. Smooth, she agreed softly, but careless with his dust. She reached for her knitting bag. People forget, Inspector. Clocks don't lie, but shoes often do. Mrs. Peel sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the carpet. The faint smell of polish lingered around her, the same lemon scent Miss Marple had noticed earlier. Inspector Slack leaned against the mantel. Now then, Mrs. Peel, just tell us your usual routine. You looked after the house? Yes, sir. Everything except the clocks. Those were always Mr. Salis's pride. He wound them himself every morning. But the big ones, the grandfather and the study regulator, I handled on Fridays. Every Friday? Yes, sir. Regular as Sunday service. Slack nodded. And last night? Mrs. Peel hesitated. Her hands twisted once before she answered. I didn't wind them. You forgot? No, sir, she said quickly. I was told not to. The silence after that was heavy. Even the clocks, frozen as they were, seemed to listen. Miss Marple spoke gently. Told not to? That's unusual, isn't it? Mrs. Peel nodded. Very. He never liked them running down. Said a stopped clock was bad for the soul. So who told you not to wind them? Mrs. Peel's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to the carpet. I assumed it was Mr. Salis's wish. Miss Drew came with the message. Said the master didn't want any disturbance that evening. Slack frowned. Miss Drew, the nurse. Housekeeper? Yes, sir. She said he was resting. That he'd attend to the clocks himself in the morning. Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her bag. And did she say why? No, miss. Only that he needed quiet. He hadn't been sleeping well, she said. Wanted the house still. Still, Marple repeated softly. An odd word for a house full of ticking. Mrs. Peel's voice wavered. I didn't think much of it. She seemed in a hurry. Said she'd bring him his evening tea. Slack scribbled a note. And what did you do after? Went home, sir. I lived 2 cottages down. Came back next morning when I heard the doctor'd been called. Marple rose, her expression thoughtful. So then, the night before he died, every clock in this house was left to wind itself down. Mrs. Peel swallowed hard. Yes, miss. And when I came in the next morning, the whole house was silent. Not a single tick. Just like someone had ordered time to stop. Marple finished quietly. She turned towards Slack. Someone wanted silence, Inspector. Absolute silence. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And Miss Drew seems to know exactly who. The study smelled faintly of old paper and brass polish, too perfect, too staged. Inspector Slack stood by the window, flipping through Salas's papers, while Miss Marple moved with quiet precision around the desk. Everything was aligned, inkwell straight, pens evenly spaced. A man of habits had lived here, and someone had tried very hard to imitate his order. Her eyes caught a glint beneath the lamp. Something round, smooth. She reached for it, a polished brass pendulum bob, small enough to fit in her palm. "Inspector," she said softly, "was there a clock missing a heart?" Slack looked up. "A what?" She held it up. "The pendulum's bob. Without this, no clock can move." Slack frowned. "Maybe it rolled off?" Marple shook her head. "It didn't roll, Inspector. It was placed. And someone took care to polish it clean." He crossed the room and sniffed. "Smells like wax." "Not wax," Marple corrected. "Paraffin." Again. He blinked. "That oily smell?" "Yes. The same I found on the letter." Slack muttered something under his breath and pulled out his notebook. "What are you thinking?" She turned the brass piece over in her hand. The surface was slick, faintly greasy. No fingerprints, no dust, almost as if it had been bathed before display. "Paraffin doesn't belong on brass," she said finally, her voice calm but certain. "Unless, of course, one wishes to stop it moving." Slack stared at her. "You mean someone tampered with the clocks?" Marple nodded slowly. Mr. Salas's house ran by precision. Each pendulum, each tick, a testament to his order. But paraffin dulls motion. It gums the air. One drop, and the swing stiffens. Two, and it stops. Slack exhaled through his teeth. "So you're saying whoever killed him wanted every clock to stop?" "Not wanted," Marple corrected gently. "Needed." He frowned. "To what end?" "Perhaps," she said, setting the brass piece down, "to fix a time that never happened." She turned toward the mantel clock, its pendulum absent, its glass freshly wiped. Her eyes lingered. "The killer didn't just end a life, Inspector. They ended motion itself." Slack scribbled quickly. "This gets stranger by the minute." Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, not stranger, Inspector. Just more deliberate." She lifted the pendulum bob again, holding it to the light. It gleamed like a coin, reflecting her calm eyes. "Someone," she said quietly, "was counting every tick until they decided to stop time. It happened 2 nights later. Just before dawn, the constable's knock shattered the quiet. Inspector Slack stood in the lane, coat unbuttoned, face grim. "Mrs. Peel's been found," he said. "Kitchen full of gas. Lucky we got to her in time." Miss Marple followed him without a word. The morning air was cold and heavy. At the small cottage near the green, the door stood open, curtains flapping like pale flags. Inside, the smell hit first sour, choking, unmistakable. Gas, thick and sharp. A kettle lay overturned on the floor, the flame beneath long snuffed out. Mrs. Peel lay on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, pale but breathing. The village doctor hovered nearby. "She'll live," he said quietly. "Another hour, and she wouldn't." Slack exhaled. "Accidental, I'd say. Poor woman left the gas on. Forgot to strike the match." Marple's eyes moved slowly across the room, stove knobs, teacup on the counter, towel folded too neatly. "She doesn't forget," she said softly. Slack frowned. "You think this was deliberate?" "I think," Marple replied, "that Mrs. Peel was silenced." "Silenced?" "She knew something," Marple murmured, "or remembered something, and someone realized it." Slack rubbed his forehead. "You've got imagination, Miss Marple. People do foolish things." Maybe she fainted. "From fright, perhaps," she said, "but not from carelessness." She stepped closer to the stove. The knob-marked main jet was turned halfway, not enough for full flame, just enough to fill the air slowly. "Look here," she pointed. Not a matchbox in sight. If she'd meant to light the fire, she would have had them ready. Slack muttered something under his breath. Could be she knocked them off. Marple smiled faintly. "Then we should find them on the floor, Inspector. Do you?" He looked. Nothing. The silence stretched. Even the doctor paused, watching the old woman trace invisible lines through the room. "Someone waited until the house was still," she said quietly. "Turned the gas low. Enough to drift, not enough to roar." Slack sighed. "And why would anyone go to all that trouble?" Marple looked toward the window, where the morning light touched the rim of the kettle. "For the same reason they stopped every clock," she said. "Because Mrs. Peel might have told the truth." Slack's jaw tightened. "So now we've got a killer who stages accidents." Marple nodded once. "And one who doesn't like unfinished business." The faint hiss of escaping gas still whispered from the pipe. Slack turned the valve sharply. Silence. Miss Marple looked down at Mrs. Peel's pale face and said quietly, "Someone else in this village is running out of time." By evening the house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that invited thinking. Miss Marple sat near her parlor window, notebook open, a single candle burning beside her. She wasn't writing much, just marking times. 8 o'clock. 8 minutes. 8 words in the letter. Patterns comforted her, and this one whispered something deliberate. The clocks in Sal's house, everyone had stopped at 8. The letter, "The clock strikes 8, and the truth dies," and Mrs. Peel, the gas turned on exactly 8 minutes before she was found. Not chance, not coincidence. Pattern. The doorbell broke the silence. Inspector Slack, hat still in hand, looked tired. He didn't sit. "Mrs. Peel's stable," he said. "Doctor says she'll pull through. Can't remember a thing." "Or won't," Marple replied softly. Slack frowned. "You've got that look again." "The look that means I see a thread," she said. He sighed. "All right then. Let's hear it." Marple pointed to her notes. 8 o'clock. All clocks stopped. 8 words in his message. 8 minutes the time the gas was turned. "You see, Inspector, it's not the number that matters. It's what it means to someone who values precision." Slack squinted. "You think someone planned it all to the minute?" "Yes. Someone who understands mechanics, timing, someone who knew exactly when things happen and how long they last." Slack rubbed his chin. "Could have been Salis himself. Maybe he left the letter as a puzzle." Marple shook her head. "No, Inspector. Edward Salis loved control, not chaos. And this pattern isn't control, it's mimicry. Someone copying his habits to hide behind them." Slack muttered. "You're saying they're pretending to be him?" "In a way," she said. "They're using his obsession to disguise their own plan. Precision always hides intention. A perfect pattern looks innocent until it doesn't." Slack leaned back, unimpressed but listening. "And this pattern, where does it lead?" Marple's eyes moved toward the church tower visible through the window. "The bell strikes 8 every evening. You can hear it from Sal's house. Whoever set those clocks wanted that sound to mean something." Slack followed her gaze. The faint echo of the church bell carried across the fields, 8 slow chimes fading into stillness. Marple closed her notebook. "Each time it strikes, Inspector, someone's marking a moment. The only question left is what happens when it strikes again." Slack said nothing. He just looked at her. And for the first time, he didn't argue. The clockmender's shop sat behind the post office, small and cluttered, ticking with every kind of rhythm known to time. Tiny brass faces lined the shelves, pendulums swayed in uneven motion, and the faint hum of gears filled the air like a heartbeat. Miss Marple stepped in quietly. Inspector Slack followed, ducking his head beneath a low beam. The man behind the counter looked up, thin, graying, oil-stained fingers and careful eyes. "Tobias Red," Slack said. "You fix clocks for the late Mr. Salis?" Red nodded slowly. "Did. Fine work, his pieces. Precise man. Demanded silence when I tuned his regulators." Marple smiled gently. "We've heard you repaired one recently." Red's hands froze on the bench. "Yes, a small mantel clock. Stopped dead 3 weeks ago. Nothing wrong with the mainspring. The oil was thick, though. I cleaned it." Slack sniffed the air. "Paraffin?" Red looked up sharply. "You've a sharp nose, Inspector." "Yes. I use paraffin for loosening grime before the proper oil." Marple's eyes glimmered. "And who brought the clock in?" Red hesitated. Not Mr. Salis himself? Marple prompted. No, it was Miss Drew. Slack straightened. His nurse? Red shook his head. Not quite. Companion of sorts. Said Mr. Salis asked her to have it seen to. She seemed hurried. Nervous, even. Told me not to mention it to anyone. Marple tilted her head. Odd request for a clock. Red gave a short laugh. That's what I thought. But she said he valued punctuality and hated outsiders meddling with his timepieces. Did you deliver it back yourself? No. She came again 2 days later. Paid in cash. Smelled faintly of lavender. And, well, paraffin. Funny enough. Slack wrote quickly. Where's the clock now? Back in his study, I'd assume. Marple ran a gloved hand across a brass pendulum hanging on the wall. The scent was familiar, the same sharp trace she'd found in Salis' house. Her eyes softened. So the clock was cleaned, polished, and returned by Miss Drew just before his death. Red nodded. Yes, ma'am. Seemed anxious to have it done right. Marple smiled faintly. Love is such a curious mechanic, Mr. Red. It fixes what doesn't need fixing, and breaks what works perfectly. Slack frowned. You mean she tampered with it? Perhaps, Marple said, turning toward the door. But she didn't do it for herself. Slack followed. Then who for? Marple's eyes lingered on the ticking clocks around her. Ah, Inspector, she said softly. Love travels faster than truth and usually in the wrong direction. The clocks chimed together as they stepped outside, all striking 8. Perfectly. Miss Marple returned to Mr. Red's shop the next afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy. The sound of ticking filled the narrow room again, soft, endless, patient. Red was bent over a bench, lens in eye, coaxing life into a stubborn pocket watch. He didn't hear her at first. Only when her voice came polite, quiet, did he look up. I hope I'm not disturbing your rhythm, Mr. Red. He smiled faintly. Time. Never mind's company, Miss Marple. What can I do for you? I wanted another look at that clock you repaired for Mr. Salis, the one Miss Drew brought. He hesitated, then nodded. I've still got the repair ticket. She never took the tag. He rummaged through a drawer and handed her a folded slip of paper. A small piece of pale blue silk thread clung to the corner. Marple plucked it gently free. Ah, interesting, she murmured. Red frowned. Bit of her dress, maybe? No, she said softly. Too fine. This is sealing thread, the kind used on waxed letters. But see here, Mr. Red. She held it up to the light. The end was looped in a tiny knot, tied against the grain. Left-handed. Red blinked. How can you tell? Marple smiled. Because it tightens the wrong way. A right-handed knot pulls neat and straight. This one twists. Slack, standing by the door, leaned closer. Meaning what? Meaning, she said, that whoever tied this is the same person who sealed Edward Salis's letter. Red straightened. You're sure? Quite. I noticed it on the letter itself, the binding string under the wax. A small twist to the left. Slack frowned. Miss Drew again? Possibly, Marple said. Or someone she was helping. She moved along the shelves, eyes scanning the benches, the bottles, the cloths. One jar caught her attention, nearly empty, labeled lamp oil, paraffin. The rim was smudged with pale residue, and beside it, a coil of silk thread, the same blue. Mr. Red, she asked gently, did you lend any of your materials recently? Only to Miss Drew. She wanted to clean a brass plate herself. I gave her a drop or two of paraffin and a spare bit of thread. Nothing dangerous. Marple turned, voice low. Nothing dangerous, no, unless one knows where to tie it, and what to stop with it. Slack's pencil paused mid-note. You think the letter and the clock were part of the same plan? Marple nodded once. One prepared the time, the other announced it. Her fingers brushed the blue thread again. It's always the smallest fibers, Inspector, they connect everything. Outside, the church bell began to toll the hour. 8 chimes, each one slower than the last. Inspector Slack had grown tired of theories. He stood by the hearth in Salis's study, arms folded, watching Miss Marple lay 2 small glass vials on the desk like pieces in a quiet game of chess. The fire had burned low. Only the sound of the ticking mantel clock, one of the few still working, filled the air. "Now then," Slack said, "you've got that look again. What is it this time, teacup psychology or clock philosophy?" Miss Marple didn't answer. She just uncorked the first vial and held it under his nose. A faint, oily sweetness. "Clock oil," she said. "Refined, clean, keeps things moving. One tiny drop can make an old pendulum swing for weeks." Then she opened the second. A sharp sting filled the air, heavy and chemical. "Paraffin," she murmured, "used to loosen grime. Excellent for removing stains, or stopping motion entirely." Slack grimaced. "You've been raiding the evidence again." "Just observing," she replied mildly. Mr. Salas kept both here in his study. The clock oil bottle was half full, the paraffin nearly empty. He frowned. "Could be cleaning day." "Except the clocks weren't cleaned, Inspector. They were killed, every pendulum stiff, every gear dry, every tick silenced at the same moment. You can't polish a heartbeat. You can only stop it." Slack rubbed his temples. "You're saying the paraffin stopped the clocks?" "Yes," she said simply. "One measures time, the other removes it." He exhaled. "And what would be the point of that?" "To make death appear natural," Marple said softly. "To erase the sound of a struggle, the rhythm of truth. If all the clocks stopped, the precise time of death becomes guesswork. No heartbeat of the house to mark it." Slack looked at her. "You really think someone planned all that just to hide when he died?" "I think someone understood his habits," she replied. "Edward Salas believed in order. If a clock stopped, he fixed it. Every Friday, every morning, without fail. Whoever tampered with them counted on that. They created confusion inside his perfection, and then framed it as accident." Slack paced once, twice, trying to push the thought away. "It's far-fetched." Miss Marple's voice softened. "So is coincidence, Inspector, and yet it happens rather often, usually when someone forces it." He stopped pacing. "You've got suspects?" She nodded slightly. 3, each tied to the same hour. The nephew who needed money, the companion who carried paraffin and silk, and the clockmender who lent both without question. Slack crossed his arms. "You're guessing." "No," she said. "I'm listening. The pattern speaks. Everything ends at 8, because someone made sure of it." He looked down at the vials. 2 simple bottles. One clear, one cloudy. Marple recorked them gently. "The difference between time and death, Inspector," she said quietly, "is often measured in drops." Slack's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he didn't argue. Outside, the church bell began to chime. 8 strokes. Slow. Final. They sat once more in the study of Salas House, Miss Marple, Inspector Slack, and the lingering echo of clocks that no longer ticked. The air smelled faintly of polish and cold ash. Papers were spread across the desk, neat as before, waiting for order to be restored. Slack leaned on the mantel, notebook open. "All right, Miss Marple," he said at last. "Let's have it straight. You think this was murder. Then show me the steps." Marple nodded slowly. "Very well. But you must. Follow the rhythm, Inspector. It's all about timing." She gestured toward the nearest clock, its pendulum still missing. "The killer began with paraffin, a few drops on each pendulum hinge. It stiffens the swing, slows the motion until it stops altogether. That's why every clock died together, almost to the second. When the oil congealed, time stood still." Slack frowned. "And that tells us what?" "That Mr. Salas's death was staged inside that stillness," she said calmly. "The clocks weren't victims, they were props. Their silence made the hour uncertain." She walked to the gas fire, her small gloved hand hovering near the knob. Next came the gas, turned on just enough to fill the room slowly. No flame, no sound. He would have felt faint, disoriented. Easy then to make it look accidental, an old man asleep by the fire. Slack scowled, but the door was locked, windows bolted. Of course, she said, locked from inside, after he was already unconscious. A simple hook and string through the crack of the window could do it. Someone practiced in detail, someone who planned quietly. Slack scribbled fast, trying to keep up. And the letter, that, Marple said softly, was the final illusion. She opened her small handbag and drew out the red-sealed envelope, now carefully resealed after inspection. It was written days earlier, not the night of his death. The ink shows no smudge from gas fumes, and yet the paper smells faintly of paraffin. It was kept near the same cloth used on the clocks. Slack's voice dropped. So it was planted? Yes. Posted afterward to arrive once he was gone, to make his death seem deliberate, his own message from beyond. Marple's eyes moved to the brass pendulum on the desk. The handwriting was steady because it wasn't written under duress. The message, "The clock strikes 8, and the truth dies," was literal only to the Basker, murderer. 8 o'clock became their mark, the hour they silenced everything. Slack looked up from his notes. You make it sound almost rehearsed. It was, she said. The killer understood rhythm like a composer. They needed stillness, precision, and control. Slack muttered. And I suppose you'll tell me who the conductor was. Marple smiled faintly. In due time, Inspector. For now, know this, the melody began long before the last note stopped. She looked toward the darkened clocks, each one frozen in silent witness. Time didn't stop by accident, she said. It obeyed someone's hand. The next morning broke pale and thin, like truth struggling through fog. Inspector Slack stood by the hearth again, his pencil poised but unmoving. Across from him, Miss Drew sat rigid in a chair, gloves still on, eyes fixed on the floor. Her calm was too neat, like her handwriting, like the clocks. Marple sat nearby, quiet, almost gentle. You've been most helpful, Miss Drew, she said softly. But there's one thing that doesn't fit. Drew looked up quickly. I've told you everything. I only looked after him. I was loyal. Yes, Marple said. Loyal to Mr. Salis, but also to someone else. Slack frowned. Meaning? Marple turned to him. She wasn't just the house companion, Inspector. She was also engaged quietly to Tobias Red, the clock mender. Slack blinked. The repairman? Yes, Marple said, and he helped her more than once. The blue silk thread that sealed Salis's letter came from his bench. So did the paraffin. So did the skill to stop every clock at once. Drew's hands tightened in her lap. That's absurd. Tobias repairs clocks, not murders people. Marple's voice stayed calm. He repaired one for you 3 weeks ago, the very one whose pendulum went missing. You told him it was for Salis, but he never saw the man again. He trusted you. Slack stepped forward. So what's the motive then? Marple's eyes softened. Fear, Inspector, and love. She looked at Miss Drew. You'd been helping Mr. Salis with correspondence, hadn't you? Handling checks, copying documents, even signing forms when his hand trembled. Drew's voice dropped. He asked me to. He said it was harmless. But one day, Marple said, he realized his signature had been placed where it shouldn't. A transfer, a forgery. You'd done it for Lionel, for the man he treated like a son. Drew's head jerked up. Lionel never knew. Oh, but he did, Marple said quietly. He let you believe he'd marry you after the inheritance came through, but he never meant to. You forged the papers, Miss Drew, to give him the money you thought he deserved. Drew's voice cracked. He promised we'd leave together. He said it was only until the will was read. Marple's tone softened, almost kind. So when Mr. Salis discovered the forgery, you panicked. You couldn't undo it. Tobias, poor man, helped without understanding. He showed you how to stop the clocks, to mark a moment in time. You used that trick to make his death seem peaceful, accidental, and when it was done, you planted the letter to make the hour meaningless. Tears welled in Drew's eyes. I only wanted to fix it, to keep him safe. Marple nodded. Yes, and yet, in saving one man's reputation, you ended another's life. Slack closed his notebook slowly. Miss Drew sat very still, her breath shaking. Marple's voice was barely above a whisper. "Love can move mountains, Miss Drew, but sometimes it only buries the truth beneath them." The drawing room of Sallis House was crowded once more, the curtains drawn, the lamps turned low. Inspector Slack stood near the hearth, notebook in hand, his expression a mix of fatigue and grim anticipation. Lionel leaned against the wall, pale but defiant. Tobias Red sat near the door, cap twisting in his hands, and Miss Drew sat perfectly still, eyes on the carpet, a statue of composure waiting to crack. Miss Marple took her place by the window. Her knitting lay folded beside her chair, unused for once. When she spoke, her voice was calm, steady like a pendulum that would not stop. "Let us begin with the clocks," she said. "All 40, 3 of them. Each one stopped at 8, not by chance but by design. A touch of paraffin on the hinge of every pendulum, applied carefully, quietly, a method only someone taught by a clockmender would know." Tobias looked up, startled. "Miss, I didn't." Marple raised a hand gently. "I know, Mr. Red, you showed her in kindness, but she used your lesson differently." Miss Drew's fingers clenched against her skirt. Marple continued. The house fell silent. Mr. Sallis sat by his fire, believing himself alone. He was not. Gas was released just enough to make the air heavy, the pulse slow. He never knew he was dying. Slack stepped in. "And the door locked from the inside?" Marple nodded. "A string, pulled through the window gap. A simple trick. Then the letter already written, sealed, and scented faintly with paraffin, posted the next day by someone with access to the house." She turned toward Miss Drew. "You had all the means. You handled the clocks. You sent the letter. You told Mrs. Peel to leave them unwound. You alone could move freely between the workshop and this room." Lionel shifted uneasily. "You can't prove that," he muttered. Slack's voice came hard. "We can, actually." He reached into his coat and held up a piece of string blue silk, knotted tightly at one end. The same thread from the letter, left-handed knot. The words hung in the air. Tobias blinked in confusion. "Left-handed?" "Yes," Slack said. "You're right-handed, Mr. Red. But she isn't." All eyes turned to Miss Drew. Her breath quickened, her face drained of color. Marple spoke softly now, almost kind. "It was never about greed, was it? Only fear. Fear of losing everything and a misguided hope that love would forgive the rest." The silence stretched until something inside Miss Drew gave way. Her hands flew to her face. "I didn't mean to kill him," she cried. "It was only meant to frighten him, to make him listen, to give Lionel time." Her words dissolved into broken sobs. Slack closed his notebook. Marple rose, slow and deliberate. "Time," she said quietly, "is never so obedient, my dear. Once you stop it, it stops you too." The clocks around them remained still, as though listening, and for the first time the house truly felt empty. The village had already begun to move on. Headlines faded. Curiosity cooled. Street. Mary Mead had learned, once again, that behind lace curtains and polished manners, darkness could tick just as softly as any clock. At Gossington Hall, the world felt right again, or almost. Lady Dolly Bantry poured tea with her usual flourish, though her tone was a little quieter, her laughter not quite as loud. "Well, Jane," she said, setting the pot down. "So the lady was in love and the man a fool. I dare say it's almost romantic, in a ghastly way." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Romantic notions have ruined more lives than villains ever could." Dolly sighed. "And poor Tobias, he'll never forgive himself." "No," Marple said gently. "But guilt is the one clock that never quite stops. It only slows, then starts again when least expected." They sat for a moment in silence. The afternoon light fell across the china cups, the same way it always did, calm, predictable, reassuring. Dolly stirred her tea, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "It's strange, though. I always thought people stopped clocks to mark a death. A symbol, you know. Respect for the departed." Miss Marple nodded, gaze distant. "Yes, people do it to remember the moment someone left the world. But sometimes, she paused, the faintest crease appearing between her brows. Sometimes they stopped them to hide it. Dolly looked up. To hide it? To make us believe the wrong hour, the wrong cause, the wrong truth. Dolly shivered a little. You do make it sound dreadful. Marple's tone softened. Dreadful, yes, but logical. People rarely erase time by mistake. They do it because the truth feels too loud. Outside, the church bell began to chime the quarter hour. A gentle sound. Familiar. Honest. Dolly smiled weakly. Well, thank heavens some clocks still keep honest time. Marple nodded, sipping her tea. Yes, dear, but even honest clocks can be silenced, if one knows where to press. They sat quietly again, two old friends, one pouring sugar, the other counting seconds in thought. Finally, Dolly said, You'll stay for supper, won't you? Perhaps, Marple replied, rising with a small smile. Though I expect I've another mystery waiting at home, one that involves a missing teaspoon. Dolly laughed, grateful for the return to ordinary things. As Marple reached the door, she glanced at the clock on the mantel. Its hands stood at 8. She paused just long enough to whisper, Some habits, it seems, are hard to wind back. The familiar voice returned, calm, steady, welcoming, a soft breath before words. The sound of distant ticking, faintly under the music. In Street Merry Mead, time never lies, only people do. The tone lingered, carrying the quiet weight of the story just told. In every cottage, in every parlour, behind every polite curtain, there are secrets that tick quietly until someone dares to listen. Miss Marple listens. Not for drama, not for proof, but for rhythm, the rhythm that truth always keeps, even when the clocks have stopped. A gentle pause. Tonight, it was a letter, a little paraffin, and a woman who loved the wrong man. Tomorrow, it will be something else. A whisper, a gesture, a cup of tea poured too slowly. And somewhere, Miss Marple will notice. The faint chime of a clock faded into the background. 1, 2, 3, 8. Each note soft, final, deliberate. In Street, Mary Mead. The voice continued, low and even. The hours always tell on us in the end. You can stop the clocks, you can polish the brass, but you can't hide what the heart remembers. A small pause, the warmth of closure. Thank you for listening. Until our next mystery. The ticking stopped, and silence, neat, perfect, complete, closed the story like a final heartbeat.